second part of the series on Ching-Yuen and his 4 principles or secrets to a long life. I'm going to talk about the first 2. The first part of the series obviously was an introduction to Li and his history and who he is. So if you want to know more about that, check that out. It's part 1 of this series. So part 2 here, we're going to talk about his principles, the first 2, which are keep a quiet heart and sit like a tortoise. So my personal interpretation of these 2 principles is, the first one is to keep a quiet heart. First of all, the ancient Chinese and the Taoists, the Chinese medicine, they all interpret the heart as being sort of the central aspect of our being, or our mind. Heart, which is translated, or in Chinese it's Shen, and that translates as heart, also can be understood as spirit, and this could also be understood as mind. Now, different metaphysical philosophies will give different labels to different aspects of our being, but the Chinese understanding of it is that your Shen, your heart, your spirit, and your mind are all the same thing. This is what they are, and it's located obviously in the chest. You could say it's almost like the heart chakra in a way. I'd personally say it's a bit of a different understanding of it. The Chinese didn't see it as a big vortex of energy, sort of like a, if you're familiar with the term Dan Qian, they thought of it as a Dan Qian in this part of the body. So if we understand that the mind is located in this area, and that meditation calms the mind, it calms the spirit, it promotes spiritual growth, keeping a quiet heart was the recommendation of Li in terms of balancing the emotions, the Shen and mind spirit. It relates to the emotions as well. So by keeping all these in balance and harmony, it's going to promote a longer life. And this, we can naturally understand this just from a holistic standpoint. There's tons of information about there, even in mainstream scientific and medical journals, about how effective it is for health to be, calm in your mind, and just literally being healthy mentally. Now, we often relate to our mind as being in our head, and we could also say these are connected, our heart and mind. It's one. Keeping a quiet heart is definitely a recommendation that spans through all religions, all spiritual traditions, and this is just about, being healthy mentally. And if we really understand how mind affects our physical body in terms of emotional dispositions, we could very well say that this is the most important factor for health. Having been through the program at the Hippocrates Health Institute and being familiar with the teachings of Dr. Brian Clement, a very respected authority on longevity, anti-aging, raw food, just overall health and healing people from disease, he has recognized that even above nutrition, above exercise, above all these things, it's the mental, and I'm going to point to my head, but I could also point to my heart to talk about the mental aspect. That's what we're trying to relate here, is connecting the heart and mind. But he talks about the psychology of people recovering from disease or illness, or just wanting abundant health. He talks about the psychology being the most important factor. He's seen more people get better with proper resolution of their emotional and mental imbalances than people who follow the Hippocrates health diet and lifestyle, which is very fantastic. But he's saying that the mental aspect of health can even override that. If you're just following the lifestyle but you have really an unhealthy or imbalanced disposition in your being, in your mental or emotional part of yourself, then that can negate everything else you're doing, depending on how severe that aspect of yourself or that disposition is affecting the rest of your body. So by going through our whole lives and spending time with our attention on this aspect of ourselves and resolving the imbalances, we could say, in this aspect of yourself, we're really opening the door for profound levels of health that could lead to extreme longevity like Ching-Yuen suggests it can. So if we understand that keeping a quiet heart could translate as keeping a still and quiet mind, we might begin to understand that certain practices like Qigong and specifically meditation can be a great key to longevity. And this relates to the second principle of the four, which is sit like a tortoise. And my personal understanding of this principle is that the tortoise, when you examine it, and there's a lot of references to animals throughout Taoist health practices and their literature and their metaphysical practices, and also, you know, traditional and metaphysical practices throughout the entire world. Shamanism, yoga, Native American traditions, they all relate to the animal spirits in nature, and they look to animals as sources of wisdom or examples that embody certain characteristics that can be sort of taken on by the practitioner to achieve whatever goal it is they're looking to achieve. So a tortoise in nature is regarded as sort of a symbol of wisdom and also longevity in many cultures. The Chinese recognize that tortoises live a long life. You know, the giant tortoise is one of the longest lived land animals in the world. There are definitely certain animals that live longer, but the tortoise, being a fairly complex creature in terms of how functional it is as an animal, how mobile it is, it's quite profound how this animal can live to be, you know, over 200 years. And sitting like a tortoise can also relate to meditation. So if you were to, I guess you could say, merge with the idea of a tortoise, if you think of yourself as a tortoise, and you think of what it would be like to be a tortoise, you might start to find that just using your imagination, thinking what it would be like and getting inside the body of a tortoise in your mind, you can sort of feel, depending on how well you're able to do this, you can feel that a tortoise doesn't think too much. It doesn't spend its time worrying about things. It takes its time. It takes a lot of time. You know, it chews on grass, kind of plods along. It's got a shell that it can hide in to protect itself, so it doesn't really have much fear of danger, except for obviously very large predators, but specifically the giant tortoise has no natural enemies, as it's so big, and specifically on the Galapagos where it lives, has no natural predators. So because of this, if you were a tortoise, at least a giant tortoise, or probably some other species of tortoise as well in the wild, you'd have very little, if any, fear. So if you can embody that in yourself, those qualities, the qualities of a tortoise, and specifically if you sit as a tortoise, and I interpret this as sitting to meditate every day, taking time, at least once a day, to sit and let your thoughts really slow down. I mean, sitting, not really necessarily using any technique, and if you're never meditated before, or even if you've been meditating for several decades, I encourage you to check out the article I've written below, which is sort of like a primer on my understanding of the word meditation, which, you know, there's a lot said out there about what meditation is, and quite frankly, the Chinese term for meditation is Ching-Yuen, which translates as sit still and do nothing. That's their term that they use for meditation. So that in and of itself tells you that there isn't really any technique you need to use. It's basically sitting still and becoming the observer. Anything else you do becomes a technique, becomes a practice, becomes Qigong or visualization. And you might be sitting there, you might be sitting in lotus position, it doesn't matter how you're sitting, but meditation could be understood as sitting there and observing. Not even focusing on the breath, because as soon as you do that, you're doing something other than meditation. So, you know, this practice exists in Tibetan Buddhism, it exists in Zen Buddhism, it exists in Chan Buddhism, it exists in yoga, it exists in Hermetics. This is the very, you could say, foundational or highest practice in all of these traditions, which is just sitting still and doing nothing. It's being like the tortoise. It's sit like a tortoise every day, letting the mind sort of wind down, and over time, more and more your thoughts will trail off, and you'll be sitting in vacancy of mind without having imposed anything upon your mind to reach that state.